George Bailey could have been somebody. A wealthy engineer, a planner of modern cities, jet-setting around the country for a living, travelling around the world.
What'd you wish, George?
Well, not just one wish, a whole hatful.
He could have been successful, but he never does any of that. He never does any of the things he dreamt of doing. Instead, he denies himself for the sake of his town and his community. At his lowest ebb, George thinks about killing himself, only to be shown all along that his existence, his life, is in fact a wonderful one. Let's look at the story of George Bailey, a hero in the modern age. So as I record this, we're approaching Christmas, and so I thought I'd take this opportunity to explore an all-time cinematic Christmas classic. Obviously there are spoilers here to come. Frank Capra's 1946 classic tells the story of the life of George Bailey, an ambitious young man who dreams of escaping his small-town existence to make a name for himself and to see the world. The movie begins one Christmas Eve with prayers from the whole town for this man, George Bailey, clearly in some kind of danger. The life of George is then shown in a flashback from boyhood to the present day.
Pop, you want a shock? I think you're a great guy.
After the death of his idealistic father, George postpones his planned travels before college to resolve issues with the family business, the Bailey Brothers Building and Loans. Mr. Potter, a powerful board member who incidentally owns most of the town, seeks to immediately dissolve the business to further his own greedy ambitions. The only way to prevent Potter from having his way is for George to take over the business himself, encouraged by his affable if inept Uncle Billy. And so George leaves his own ambitions behind, ends up getting pulled into the family business, building affordable homes for his community. Homes which George scarcely makes a profit on, and then settling down and having a family. And so the movie takes us through the early history of the 20th century, from the Great Depression to the Second World War. We see that George's days become long and hard as he battles to keep Potter at bay. He grows tired, he grows weary. And on one Christmas Eve, when Uncle Billy loses a huge sum of the company's money, George's life starts to unravel.
Maybe, I don't want any maybe. We've got to find that money. I'm no good to you. Uncle Billy, look, do you realize what's going to happen if we don't find it?
His life falling apart, George runs out in despair, praying desperately for a God like so many of us he is not even sure exists to help him, and ultimately deciding to commit suicide. At the last moment, he's thwarted by Clarence Oddbody, an angel sent down from heaven to ensure that George Bailey lives.
I had to act quickly. That's why I jumped in. I knew if I were drowning, you'd try to save me. You see, you did. And that's how I saved you.
AS2, what's that AS2?
Angel, second class.
So the story, based on a short story which in turn was loosely based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, then moves towards its final act, with George being shown what the town, his world, would have been like if he had never existed. It's said how each person's life touches so many other lives, and when we do something for the good, there's no telling how much good it can set off, a chain reaction of sorts. In this alternative reality, George's family are worse off because of what his generosity gave them. His Uncle Billy's business went bust after George's father died.
Hey, where'd the building and loan move to?
Building and what?
The Bailey building and loan was up there.
They went out of business years ago.
There was no one else to drive forward affordable homes, so greedy Mr. Potter controlled all of the property. Because of that, the town is filled with casinos and seedy clubs. Crime grew. Anything to make money. George was a good man, and his impact on the world was real. He pleads and prays to be brought out of this nightmarish vision.
I want to live again. I want to live again. Please, God, let me live again.
And his wish is granted. Realizing all he's done and all he has to be thankful for, George then runs home to be greeted by everyone whose life he's touched. And they all come and donate money to make up for the lost fortune. Released just after the war, Frank Capra's masterpiece came at a time with a great need for hope, as Capra himself said. It's the culmination of his work over almost 10 years, with similar feel-good movies he directed before the outbreak of the war, also starring James Stewart amongst others. But this isn't a movie review. George Bailey is a hero like those we're touching upon, but in the modern age. The hero who denies himself. And this story is packed full of profound themes and ideas. It's a Wonderful Life appeals to people of all ages and backgrounds, and it's no overstatement to say that today it's one of the most beloved films of all time. Its fans doubtless include people of all political perspectives and outlooks, secular and religious people too. We have to ask, therefore, in this highly divisive, politicized age, why? Each Christmas the movie can be seen playing at local cinemas. Where I live in recent years it's always been fully sold out, and so usually now there are multiple showings. Its popularity seems to be growing year upon year. We may put this down to nostalgia for another age, and certainly there's an element of truth to that. We may say it's just such a well-written and attractive Hollywood movie, and of course that too is true. But fundamentally, the movie gets to the heart of the so-called spirit of Christmas, the act of giving. Giving on a profound level. Let me get to that. Because that idea in itself is far more profound than we may think today. It's not just our consumer gift culture, nor is it just the three wise men at Christ's nativity, which kids still enact at school plays. I want to try to stay out of politics as much as is possible. However, it's worth noting here how the ethos of this movie transcends the usual dividing lines to shine through to something deep. This, I think, is evidence for its profound truth, even to a secular person. Because in It's a Wonderful Life, the liberal-minded or left-leaning person sees George, the helper of the less mobile classes, against commercial greed. George is never seduced by Mr. Potter's enticing offers to constantly join him in pursuit of wealth and exploitation.
God, you sit around here and you spin your little webs and you think the whole world revolves around you and your money. Well, it doesn't, Mr. Potter.
Then on the other side, the conservative or right-leaning person sees George, the helper of his community, who does good off his own steam, off his own back. George doesn't rely on the authorities or the government to restrain Mr. Potter's greed. Now, I'm not going to suggest that It's a Wonderful Life is heavy on theology or strict religion. It's obviously not. But even in a playful sense, it alludes to the heavens and to this idea of angels, which even the characters at first laugh at. The world it shows is full of meaning, and in a much more serious sense, living a good moral life, the prayers of its characters, and God himself are invoked frequently in the movie.
I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way.
In the film, we clearly see George's office contains a piece of wisdom written next to the photo of his late father, which reads, "All you can take with you is that which you have given away." The director, Frank Capra, was himself Catholic. He apparently believed, many decades ago, that ill-willed people may destroy religion, but to quote him, they will never conquer the cross. We ought to remember taking with you that which you have given away, or the cross, are not just cosy thoughts. The cross itself was an instrument of torture. Rather, they represent the most profound ideals and images which have been handed down to us. Indeed, they're more than ideals. It's a Wonderful Life's enduring and wide appeal is due to the fact that it's speaking of something eternally true on a far deeper and more profound level than cinematic escapism. If we admit that, of course, we must admit that there is such a truth, that this profound truth has a source, and to sort of paraphrase G.K. Chesterton, it seems to have come from another realm, an ideal together almost outside of time.
If Potter gets a hold of this building and alone, there'll never be another decent house built in this town.
Difficult at any period, impossible at no period, as demonstrated, even in fiction, by the self-denying and giving of George Bailey. What Capra means by the cross is, of course, the salvation which comes by sacrifice. The way in which George Bailey follows that pattern of being set down 2,000 years ago by a particular man.
That's fine. All right, now, Miss Thompson, how much do you want?
But it's your own money,
Now,
George.
never mind about that. How much do you want?
The pattern shown in the story of Christ, that to willingly give yourself for the good of others, to symbolically walk into your own arrest in the garden, to be scorned and hit by fools, to be given a cross you scarcely believe you can bear, and to willingly march with it up the hill, is the highest mode of being, for you and for me. It may sound scandalous or morbid, or even arbitrary when laid out so starkly, but we of course see it emulated in all of our great narrative heroes even today. The hero who sacrifices himself for others, Nothing like the mythical characters looked up to before the all-too-human Jesus of Nazareth. Pagan heroes whose killing and raping was to be celebrated. And we indeed recognise supreme selflessness in others as the very definition of heroic in our culture still living in a Christian afterglow. The denial of our self-will in order to truly exist, to truly have a wonderful life, are summed up beautifully, I think, in the words Leonard Cohen penned about Jesus of Nazareth. Only in drowning can you see him.
You've got your wish. You've never been bored.
Or only in willingly entering a kind of mini-death of all of your selfish passions will he reach into the water and pull you into the sunlight of a new day. Once we recognise this in It's a Wonderful Life, we're certain to never see it the same again. George even says to Potter that his father died a much richer man than Potter will ever be.
Anyway, my father didn't think so. People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. Well, in my book, he died a much richer man than you'll ever be.
How? How when his business doesn't even make a profit, when it's about to be chloroformed, to quote the characters in the movie? Here, as in throughout the story, we see laws and rules that are not of this earth, not bound up with the material treasures of earth.
Mr. Bailey, there's a deficit. I know, $8,000.
George, I've got a little paper.
I'll bet it's a warrant for my arrest.
Teachings we scarcely even know the origins of anymore, yet they came from a particular time, from a particular man in a particular place. We see that George gives himself for his town, and that this, in fact, saves him from the perilous loss of so much money. The people rescue him from death, which relays to us again that the way of Christ is not some escapist fantasy primarily focused on another life after this one. I believe it reveals ripples of that mystery, of that hope we have of what might come after, but that those ripples are seen on a fractal level here and now.
I want to live again. Please, God, let me live again.
They're seen in the resurrection of George Bailey when the snow begins to fall again, as he pleads for God to let him live, aware that his wife and his children are so much more than his failed ambitions and than money and prestige. Although to his surprise, he has in fact found prestige in the eyes of his community for willingly giving himself to serve them.
I wouldn't have a roof over my head if it wasn't for you, George.
Mirroring the servant king which the Christian narrative speaks so profoundly of, which Jesus himself spoke of to his band of disciples, fishermen, ordinary people whom he tasked with spreading his message, his rewriting of the moral code for the entire world, which rather incredibly they did. We'll keep coming back to the truths revealed in film narratives like this, even if we've forgotten why, even if we don't recognise that it speaks of ideals and truths which emerged fully formed in the first century. Truths and a narrative which I don't believe for a second anyone could have just made up as a novelist writes a novel. It's a Wonderful Life has been with me personally since I was 17, from over a decade before I was a Christian, which is why I believe I can speak of its immense power as a story. It became my favourite film. I was obsessed with it, and I had a stint of watching it every year, every Christmas for 10 years in a row with a close friend at our local cinema. We used to joke, two secular young Western guys, that this movie was sacred. We'd use that word. And it does seem to have taken on a quality like that for so many people today, with independent cinemas across our countries showing it every December to packed out audiences, even applauding as the film ends to hark the herald angels sing and the words of Auld Lang Syne. Little did I know growing up, wide-eyed and idealistic, all those years ago, all the while, that It's a Wonderful Life, that the lovable actor Jimmy Stewart's lanky arms were merely holding a mirror up to the source of that light and were pointing someone like me the way back home, back to something our science and our materialism has caused so many of us to abandon, leaving us spiritually bereft as a result.
To my big brother George, the richest man in town.
I only hope that in our secular age, a love for the movie continues to grow and that more and more people begin to ponder its message and the true meaning of Christmas. The Mass for He who came into this world and showed us all the way. It is not merely a comforting old story, as the skeptical atheist may say, for it's a profoundly difficult story and path to tread in a world which bids us instead to come and play in Pottersville. Yet paradoxically, in Christ's own words, pick up your cross and follow me, we find there is a profound assurance, because we see all around us quite plainly that to give is the only way to truly be.